leans over to me during dinner tonight. She says, do you do a lot of public speaking? And I said, not really, no. So then I thought, maybe I should be nervous. So then I thought, I read once where people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death. Which means that the person giving the eulogy would rather be in the casket. Anyhow, so this is what we're going to talk about today. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay, good. Nothing worse than not being able to be heard. We're going to talk about this. I will start with, there are a few things good about getting old. Very few things, but there are a few. One is that you can really be more candid, and that's what I intend to be tonight. I mean, I'm not going to go out of my way to insult anybody or anything, but I'm going to be candid about what I think. So no sacred cows. We're going to use common sense, and of course, I think some people in this room remember the old dragnet deal. Yeah. Just the facts, man, just the facts. That's what we're going to do. I am a professional engineer. I'd like to stay in my lane here tonight. I have a lot of experience in energy production, all sorts. Conventional oil and gas. Started when I was in college, working here in Traverse City as a roustabout for Amoco Production Company. I've been a past member of the Michigan, or a past president of the Michigan Oil and Gas Association, chairman. And then 15 years ago, sold all that. We had a company that actually pioneered some of the fracking techniques that people are for or against. And then switched over to renewables. So I feel like I'm well grounded in that. I'm not a climate science expert, so that brings me to my next slide. And down here in real little letters it says, I'm also a lawyer. So, let me say that. Oh yeah, exciting news. Huge treasure found on Oak Island. Wait a minute. How did I get in here? How the hell did I get in here? Somebody stuck that. That's a different presentation. All right, so we're going to talk about carbon, serious topic. You can't hardly pick up, nobody has a newspaper anymore anyway, but you can't go to the internet without reading about, climate change, carbon loading the atmosphere, global warming, etc. So it is a very relevant topic. I'm not a climate scientist, I said that, but there are an awful lot of good scientists who seem to believe this is a real major issue. For my own part, I'll give you my opinion. I think there's cause for concern. I don't know about these whatever that word is, really bad scenarios. We are at the highest CO2 levels in the atmosphere in 2.5 million years, though, so that is somewhat troubling. And this is something I'm sure of. In the long term, we need to replace fossil fuels anyway. That's going to take a long time. The transition is going to be big because we use an awful lot of these things. And I will tell you, having spent my life in that we will never run out of oil and gas. And by never, I mean never. But it will get very, very pricey because we're into what's called the source rocks now. I'm not going to explain that. But oil and gas eventually are going to peter out. And the age of oil and gas in the age of humanity is going to be a blip, which means we have to figure this out at some point. It's not imminent. There's a lot of oil and gas out there, but it is something that political leaders should be considering. So I'm saying we should probably be working that way anyway. Let's see if I can go forward instead of backwards. Yes, okay, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the scale of the problem. We're going to talk about how we, the people of this planet, have done to date. We're going to not spare any sacred cows. I'm going to tell you what I think won't work, and I'll tell you what I think will work. And there it is again. Okay, the scale of the problem is absolutely enormous. There would be analogies I could give you about this 35 billion tons of CO2, but folks, that's a gas, okay? So we, the people of the planet, emit 35 billion tons of a global warming gas. So that is how much we have to not use if we're going to go to net zero. So I won't belabor that point. It is a gigantic problem, but I will dwell on that first word up there, second word. It's a global issue, and anybody who wants to try and address this has to think globally, or it won't work. Let's look at efforts to date. It's arguable about when this all started, but I just picked this. This is a New York Times article. Global warming has begun, experts tell the Senate. This was 1988. Okay, so let's say you know, I don't know when Al Gore was running around with his presentation, I don't remember, but let's say at least in 1988, it was well known this was a problem. We got graphs, we got all kinds of stuff. So how have we been doing, we the people of the planet, since then? Terrible. That line there is 1988. The key line is the one on the higher one. That's global emissions. Down there in red is the United States. So the United States actually is doing reasonably well. The planet isn't doing well at all, and we're going to talk about that. And I will, because I'll talk about it later, you'll see U.S. emissions peaked in about 2005. That becomes an interesting point here in a minute. And this is the problem. It's worse than that graph, because these are the per capita numbers. The USA, 17.8 tons of CO2 per person, and all the things that we do. Germany, that has worked really hard to reduce things, but is an advanced economy, in Japan, that's why those are in there, are around 10, 11 actually. And the point of this is energy, and you've heard this before, energy, cheap energy, abundant energy drives prosperity. There's just no doubt about that. And that is one of the main reasons the U.S. is so prosperous, because we burn a lot of fossil fuels. But here's the problem. Look at the other people in the world. They want our standard of living, and I don't blame them. Why are we so special? So if India, for instance, it's an interesting number, it's 10 times, right? India has, I don't know, 3-4 times as many people as we do. And if they reach our level of CO2 emission, I mean, forget it. It's game over. So we have to figure out something that's going to be used by the people of the planet. This is actually a really sobering chart. Look at Nigeria, 0.3. They have a lot of people too, and they'd like to live well, and I don't blame them. This is where it comes from, very important. Electricity is 27% now. This is recent. These numbers move around a little bit, folks, but you know, depending on your source. But the big part of the numbers will always be accurate in terms of magnitude and impact. Transportation is 28%, electricity 27%. Transportation, though, this becomes important in my talk, is about half passenger vehicles, the things we all ride around in, and half these big trucks, ships, airplanes. People call it the hard to decarbonize sector, including agriculture, including commercial and residential, and of course industry uses a lot of fossil fuels. So this is the pie that would have to shrink a lot. And now I'm going to make some, I'm going to stay away from political comments, but the very ill-named Inflation Reduction Act, I don't think it's going to work to lower CO2 emissions very much at all. First of all, it's disingenuous because you'll read that we're going to lower emissions by 40 or 50%, right? You've read that with this bill? Yeah? That's from 2005 levels. Now you talk about disingenuous. We're already 20 to almost 30% lower than that. So this bill, even by the people who all voted for it, is only going to cut it maybe by another half that, 20%. And it's just, I don't know why they have to be disingenuous like that. But this is present. These are present numbers. And I don't think it's targeted. I think there's a lot wrong with that bill. But I won't go any farther than that. All right. No sacred cows, here we go. These are the things I'm going to briefly talk about, the things I don't think will work, because I bet you've heard about every one of them. Sacred cow number one, direct air capture. This is the deal, you read about it all the time. Scientists have come up with a way they're going to suck all this CO2 out of the air. Has anybody read that's a possibility? Yeah, no. As a mechanical engineer, I say absolutely, positively, this is a bad idea for lots of reasons. Number one reason, it won't work. But, which is a really good reason. It's hideously expensive, but you know, you would have to take all the atmosphere and pass it through some kind of collector, and the horsepower required to do that, even if you had a really good way to remove it, would be enormous. Plus, we burn carbon because it's an exothermic reaction. We got energy out of it. If we're going to try and somehow suck it back and turn it into something else, you're going the wrong way. So, and also, I think this is the worst part. The average citizen, if you're really concerned about this, might say, well, hell, science will come up with something in 5 years, we'll suck it all out of the atmosphere. So it leads to complacency. I really do not like this idea. If I was a policymaker, I wouldn't fund this. Carbon capture and sequestration. Okay, this could play a role. This is the practice of trying to capture the CO2 where it's generated, inject it into the ocean or underground. I do not believe it will work at scale. I've spent a good bit of my life moving liquids and gases and things around underground, so kind of familiar with this. It would be a small part of any global solution, a part, but not a very big one. There's lots of problems with it. It's expensive. It hasn't been proven very well. And this is the one that scares me. My wife over here is a geologist. They're talking about putting this stuff into non-traps. In other words, that's a technical term in geology, but they're talking about putting into like the Mount Simon and places like that, where it concerns me a lot that it might not stay put. So I don't think this is, people are doing it, it will play a part, but it isn't going to solve the problem. Reducing consumption, I love this. I mean, cast your mind back to that other graph. I mean, the people in Nigeria aren't going to reduce consumption. I mean, they're already not consuming anything. And the rest of the world needs to move that. It would be a small part. We've done a nice job in this country, a real nice job of being, enacting conservation members, the LEDs and all that sort of stuff. But the low-hanging fruit is gone. And the undeveloped countries aren't going to be able to cut back at all. They will grow, I think. Low-hanging fruit is gone. I don't want to go back to living in caves. I think if we're going to have a solution, I'd like to keep my standard of living. I think everybody in here would too. So I like this one. Okay, here we go. Let's shut down the oil and gas industry. And you'll see this a lot. Leave all the fossil fuels in the ground. Let's do that start right now. Environmentalists will say that. President Joe Biden had started his presidency with let's build back better, and our own governor, and I'm not throwing rocks at these people, fix the damn roads, remember? Governor Whitmer, fix the damn roads. Okay, here's what Marty Lagina says. With what? Roads need asphalt, lots of it. In fact, this country uses 400,000 barrels a day of asphalt, which is about 3 or 4% of a barrel of oil. And here, we're going to talk about electric cars. Cars need tires, lots of them. They're made from oil nowadays. They don't come from rubber trees. They're made from oil. The numbers on that are difficult, but there's probably 400, 500,000 barrels of petroleum used for that too. There are 6,000 at least other products used in everyday life, all made from oil. We can't just stop extracting oil, even if you don't burn it. So you got literally millions of barrels of oil must be produced daily for just these components. And I read this somewhere else. This actually is not my thought, but people think this is such valuable stuff as feedstock that people from the future may say, you burned it? Because this is really, really good stuff. Okay, so we can't just stop that for these reasons. And besides, I think when I get to my plan, or what I think should happen, I think we're going to need oil and gas infrastructure and expertise. Okay, this is the biggie. Wait, before I talk about this, there are lots of others, folks. There's, you hear about waves, you hear about, tidal power, you hear about all kinds of stuff. None of it can make a dent because of the scale of the problem. It all might help on the margins, but it is not a solution, I don't think. And I of course, could be wrong. But this is the one that we're all in on as a country for sure. And remember, we're going to get to the world here in a minute. We're all in on electricity for everything. When everybody talks about the grid, we're going to decarbonize the grid, it's going to fix everything. First of all, my experience with the grid is that it's a complete nightmare. We put 5 utility scale, maybe 6, I don't know, wind farms online. And here's how it works. You wouldn't think it could possibly be this inefficient, but let's say anyone here, you want to build a wind farm or you want to put up solar panels, you want to get on the grid and sell your electricity, right? There is no source to tell you where would be a good place to do that. Honestly, there isn't. So you say, well, there's a power line here, big power line, so I'm going to do it here. You have to apply to the federal government to do a study to see whether that would be a place that would accept your power. And that study might take as long as 3 years. And then when that study's done, they tell you, oh, that's a really bad place to put power in. You're going to have to spend $100 million to upgrade the grid. So there's all kinds of inertia in the system. So timing is a problem. And the other thing about the grid is that we all know it has to be reliable. You flip the switch, the lights have to come on. It's a life or death situation for many people. The grid has to run. And so renewables have this inherent problem with intermittency, which we'll talk about a little bit. The grid can't do that. In my opinion, there is no technology at a reasonable cost to make the grid carbon free. It doesn't exist right now. It just flat doesn't exist. There's a bit of a national security issue here. If all of us are running around and totally beholden to the grid for transportation and everything else, that could be a problem if somebody decides to attack the grid. I mean, the whole country would shut down. This is the cost and difficulty of installing the infrastructure is a huge issue because, which is another one of my pet peeves, we have something called zoning. And see, I've got local opposition to new power lines. You know, to get something done in this country now is very difficult. And it is going to cost, it's going to take a lot of new power lines, and I'm going to talk about storage in a second, and a lot of storage if we are going to go this route. I don't think it's possible, and when you talk about storage, I've got some numbers on that in a minute. Let me just check, I might have them right now.
You think we're good for everything, Mitch?
Yeah, we're all set.
What about hydrogen?
We're getting to that. We're going to get to that. I'll try not to take too long here. Let's see here. What do I want to make sure I don't miss? I do want to do. That's to get on the big grid, regulated by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I want to do a shout out for Traverse City Light and Power here, I really do. They've worked with us really, really well, and it's different to get onto a local distribution company because you don't have to jump through all those hoops to do that, but it's going to be smallish scale when you're trying to just sell to Traverse City. But Traverse City's done a real nice job, they've worked with us. They, of course, are difficult negotiators, as they should be, because they want the price to be as low as possible, but they've been really good. The other thing I wanted to say about, there are others I'm not going to mention that aren't so easy to work with. The other thing about the grid is it doesn't really exist as any entity. The grid is composed of probably, 1,000 to 10,000 different companies. They're all used to being a monopoly or a quasi-monopoly. And so really, because we are still a capitalist country, they tend to just want to protect their turf as item number one. And then everything else is the rest. So you get a lot of competing monopolies that you're trying to work with. It's really, really difficult for all these issues, and this is a continuation of that. Here's the problem. Even if we did, let's say tomorrow, we had the grid CO2 free, which I don't think is possible at all. Remember the pie chart? That's 27%. That's not enough to really stop this issue, not the way we're growing. So it isn't even going to work when you look at the numbers. And then more importantly, I just don't think this is a model the world will follow. It's not practical. The grid in other countries is what they call leaky. It loses a lot of electricity because it's already a mess, and ours is not all that great either. But I don't think this is a global solution, which is, remember, that's where we have to stay. The other thing is I don't think it even should be carbon-free for the foreseeable future because of that reliability issue. I think we're going to have a component, others may disagree, of probably natural gas for a long time, a really long time. Forever is getting to be a shorter period for me, okay? So I'm going to say for forever, from my standpoint, we're going to need natural gas. Maybe we can get it down. It can continue down. So to me, why are we going all in on electricity? Because as a country, we sure as heck are. It's all about the grid. We're going to have electric charging stations. We're all going to drive around in electric cars. I'm going to talk about that. I'm getting there. So I just think this is a huge mistake. We should kill this sacred cow. I just like this. I've always liked this cartoon. It's magical thinking to think the grid could do this. So the actual cartoon is a chef. He's got a lobster by the throat there, and the lobster's saying, "Shoot, did I say give you 3 wishes? I give you 4 wishes." So, when he's hanging over the pot, he'll say anything, and I think that's sort of government environmentalists are saying, make the grid carbon free, and the utility guys are saying, sure, I can do that, but I think it's magical thinking. That's why this is in here. Here's another thing too. This planet has done a really good job of handling CO2 for a long, long time. When I said direct air capture was a bad idea, here's one of the reasons it's a bad idea. See that one on the top there? That's the best device for direct CO2 capture that has ever existed and ever will exist. And the bottom one is even better. That's the ocean. The ocean naturally removes CO2. It makes limestone out of it. I mean, in huge quantities. The problem is we're overloading the system right now. And in the middle there, you may think that's a Petoskey stone, right? I'll bet you think that's a Petoskey stone. No, that's sequestered carbon. Sure as hell. I mean, that really is. That is limestone. That is carbon the ocean took out of the atmosphere a long time ago and made that rock out of it. And it is still doing that. We just have to give it a break and quit putting in so much that these two things, the big, removers of carbon can do their thing. Which is why I don't think zero carbon is a good goal either, because it's kind of impractical. It's a good goal, say, for a small utility, because then they can be a big part of the solution. But as far as the globe goes, I don't think it's attainable. It's probably not a good idea. So I wanted to say that about that. Which is why we shouldn't stop fossil fuel production. The Earth can handle some CO2. Heck, if we wanted to go to complete carbon zero, we'd have to kill everybody in here, right? We all exhale carbon dioxide. Okay, so what will work? Who asked about hydrogen? All right, so I think we need a new fuel. Green hydrogen could do that. And remember our pie chart? It can displace everything on that chart. It can be used in the airplanes, it can be used in ships, it can be used in trains, it can be used in our passenger vehicles. It can be used in everything, it can be used in industry. It's a fuel that burns really hot. I like this quote again, I stole it from somebody. We didn't get out of the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. Instead, we found a better way to do things. Here's my a brief history of fuels. As people, we first burned wood, then we figured out charcoal, that was better. Then came coal, that was better yet. And we never stopped the ones before. We still burn wood, we still burn charcoal, we still burn coal, but not at nearly the rates because oil is better. Winston Churchill converted the British fleet to oil when he was First Lord of the Admiralty because it was better. Britain had a lot of coal at the time and no oil, but it's a better fuel. Then came natural gas, which is probably the best fossil fuel we have, and now it's displacing coal for electricity generation. And I will digress at this point because remember that red graph where we've done pretty well as a country? Most of that, ironically, is because of increased natural gas production displacing coal. And so you have this environmental tug of war between the people who hate fracturing and the fact that natural gas has really improved the picture, because it has. And I'm trying to be totally neutral here. I've got a leg in both camps. I'm not a shill for the natural gas industry, but I think it's got to play a role. And of course, nuclear power, if carbon's the issue, nuclear power is great. Has its own environmental issues, it's very expensive, and decommissioning is a problem. Anyhow, that's how it's done. When you have a succession of fuels, you need a better one to displace the old ones. Okay, well, can we do that? This is a lot of stuff. I'll try and make this quick. Green hydrogen is produced by a non-CO2 emitting source of electricity, solar, wind, nuclear. They actually call nuclear pink, but let's just not get crazy with these colors of hydrogen. So you have an electrolyzer, you put the electricity in, you put water in. On one side you get hydrogen, the other side you get oxygen. You can then reburn the hydrogen, and notice you get the water back. Right? When you burn hydrogen, you get the water back. So it doesn't really use water, it moves it around. And this can be done anywhere. You just have sun or wind or some other carbon-free source of electricity and water. This is the big thing. If there's a couple key things from my talk tonight, it can be done without the grid, which means right now everybody's out there fighting under this ill-named, what's it called again? Inflation Reduction Act. Fighting for the spots on the grid to put this in. If you don't have to be on the grid, you can put it anywhere. You can probably put it in some, not very high use land somewhere 40 miles from the grid, because you can make this stuff anywhere. You don't need the grid, and I think that's the key point. How can you utilize it? I already said most of this. Everywhere. Everywhere in that pie chart you can use, if we had this fuel and if it was widely available, we could use it everywhere. And the emission factor here, if CO2 is the culprit, is zero, basically zero. There's a little bit in the manufacture of the solar panels, but effectively zero. Number 3 is going to come into play here in a second. If you use it in a fuel cell vehicle, I'm going to talk about it, it's twice as efficient, almost twice as efficient as a gasoline engine. And the only thing emitted is water, okay. This could be done incredibly quickly. I bet not many people know this, and Toyota at least has not seemingly bought into the electric car thing. Both Hyundai, how do you say that, and Toyota, they make a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, and folks, they're wonderful vehicles. You put in the hydrogen, they have a reverse electrolyzer that turns the hydrogen back to water and puts electricity out. It's basically an electric car without a battery. And it's not limited to passenger vehicles. It can be used at buses and whatever, ships. Airplanes, no, but it could be used, hydrogen can make an airplane fuel. But here's the best part. These cars that exist, right now you can go buy one, they're about the same cost as an EV. You can refuel them in the same amount of time as a gasoline-powered vehicle, and they got a range of about 400 miles. So it's like, geez, these things sound great, and they're CO2 free, they really are, if you're using green hydrogen. It's the off-the-shelf technology. I forgot to mention, I wrote a paper that's available here. There's some copies, and at the end you can get it online. I did this about a year and a half ago, and I thought if gasoline got to $5, green hydrogen would be competitive right now. Well, gasoline got to $5, and I think hydrogen is going to go down in price. So right now it could be competitive with gasoline, and if you generated it on site, which they're starting to do in Europe, in other words, you don't have to, a lot of the hydrogen haters will say, good God, you've got to liquefy it, transport it around. But a lot of these big gas stations, you know, like the big Flying J's and all those, they could generate it right on site. And then it'd be a lot cheaper than gasoline. So what are we missing? The infrastructure. Because I just think, if I said to you folks that you're thinking of buying an electric vehicle, and I said, you know about the charging issues, and you know about this and that, and I said, you could buy this car and fill it up the same amount of time you fill your gasoline car, and go 400 miles on a fill-up, and it's the same price, and the cost of your hydrogen is equivalent to the cost of gasoline, and I think just about everybody would say that's a good deal, but unfortunately right now you can't fuel it anywhere, so that's a problem. But it could all be done off the grid, and I think the world would follow this. I'm going to show you why. What's the problem? What's the problem? Why hasn't this gone farther? People have been talking about the hydrogen economy for forever. George Bush talked about it years and years ago. Who is the influence all of this, presenting this from happening? Anybody have a name?
Elon Musk. Elon Musk.
Yeah, you cheated. Because I had. One of these guys? No. No, I mean, Joe Biden is, I think, well-meaning, but I'm going to call, I call him, and like I say, I'm not holding back anything. Joe's, I think, a little logically challenged. Donald Trump is clearly factually challenged. Somebody asked me at the end of this, please, when it's question and answer, ask me about birds and windmills and our ex-president. And then, of course, that guy up in the upper right there is just evil. But he is driving the world right now. He's not helping the carbon dioxide issue because he's wanting everybody to stay addicted to Russian hydrocarbons. And by cutting off the gas, Europe is going head first back into coal right now because they have to. Got to keep the lights on. So who is it? Somebody back there already nailed it. I think, one of those guys, I think it's this guy. And I know you're not used to him being painted as a guy who's in the way of reducing carbon dioxide, but I think he could. I think he is, because I gotta stop for a second. I knew a guy in Chicago that taught me a lot about human nature and business. He was sort of my mentor. Really bright guy, real good student of human nature. Most likely in the mafia, but hey, you know. He told me, he said, Marty, when you go to pick on somebody, ask yourself, does he cash bigger checks than you do? This guy cashes way bigger checks than I do. And I think that was a stand-in for, you know, you might not be as smart, me, as you think, if this guy is doing so much better, and he clearly is. So I'm going to disregard the mafioso guy's advice and go on. Why do I think Elon Musk is the problem? Because he's convinced millions of people, more than millions, probably billions, that battery-powered electrical vehicles will fix the CO2 emission problem. Marty Lagina says they won't. Here's a real-world number right now, and anybody that has a Tesla, I know that you're well-meaning and they're great and they will play a role, all that. But the average United States emission, this is a key number, per kilowatt hour is about 0.85 pounds. 0.85 pounds of CO2 per kilowatt hour, okay? If you just burn natural gas in your car to produce that kilowatt hour, which ends up being the same thing, it will emit about 0.85 pounds of CO2, which means anybody driving around in an electric vehicle right now is basically driving around in a natural gas powered car when it comes to CO2. That's effectively what you're doing. Now, the people promoting this will say, wow, the grid's going to get to be carbon free. And remember, I said, never is a short time for me, but I say never. That'll happen. Yeah, so from a CO2 standpoint, driving around in a natural gas powered vehicle. Actually, it's a lot worse than that in Michigan because there are very few free things. No free lunches, right? Nothing like, there's no such thing as a free lunch. There is one thing that is just about free, and that's heat in a gasoline-powered vehicle, because it's a waste product. So when you drive around in a cold Michigan winter and you turn on that heater, you can feel good, because that's free. That's free. But in your electric car, that's not free at all. In fact, it's the worst thing to do with electricity is to use it for heat, unless you're using a heat pump. If you're using electrical resistivity heat, which Teslas did until very recently, they figured it out, good for them. They have heat pumps now, but there's issues with that too. Anyway, so that parity with natural gas goes away in Michigan in the winter, gets even worse. In fact, you'll see in that paper I wrote, you pretty much are better off with a real efficient hybrid from a CO2 standpoint, until the grid gets a lot better, and that's going to take how long? Never. That's a little bit rough. Forever. It's going to take forever. And actually, it's actually worse than that too for another reason, but I'll let that go. And remember, batteries and the grid are not going to decarbonize anything but a small sector. Well, not small. It's a big sector, but it's not enough. And because, I already said this. Oh yeah, I love this. Yeah. Utility scale storage valves are going to balance the grid. The estimates to do that, if we could even get enough solar and wind placed, which we probably could. I'm saying it's a lot harder with the grid than without it, but we probably could. But these numbers may not mean a lot, but it would take something like 6, I think it's terawatt hours of storage in order to balance the grid, an all renewable grid, and I think that's an underestimate. Tesla just sold a facility to PG&E in California, a big storage facility. It costs, hard to say because the numbers are hard to find, but I think it's around $500 million for one storage facility. Folks, it will store enough energy to run Traverse City for a little less than a day. $500 million. And we got to balance the grid with batteries? I just don't think so. And batteries come with their own environmental issues. Cobalt, lithium, we're going to, it's ironic that the machines that are digging this stuff out of the earth are all going to be powered with diesel unless we do something about it. Oh yeah, I already talked. That's the Elkhorn Tesla storage facility I just told you about. So we run Traverse City, this $500 million storage facility for about 20 hours. Yeah, so you need massive amount of storage in thousands of locations. I think it's not practical. And then, this really makes it, see, we're slaying sacred cows. I think this is sacred cow poop. I really hate this. I mean, he says this all the time. Fuel cells just a fundamentally inferior way of delivering electrical energy to an electric motor than batteries. Okay. He has said that, like I said, it doesn't hurt to pick on a guy like Elon Musk. I mean, what does he care? But he also has said that fuel cells are fool cells, and he says all this because of this. And you'll see this, and I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to say it. Anybody ever watch that Dead Poets Society movie? You ever watch that? Okay, good. You know in the beginning where Robin Williams says, take that, tear it out, throw it out, take it out of the book, throw it out, it's garbage. That's what this is. You'll see this all over the place. Battery electric, most efficient by far. But folks, there's so much wrong with this graph from an engineering standpoint. The first problem is, these are thermodynamic efficiencies, okay? I thought the issue was CO2. The inputs into this graph are impossible. You see at the top there it says direct, you might not be able to see it, direct charging, battery electric, 100% renewable. So it starts with the premise that you can go 100% renewable in this column, and then over in the hydrogen column it starts with the same presence. In the hydrogen, same assumption. In the hydrogen column it's entirely correct. I just showed you, we can do that. We could put up solar panels, we can make green hydrogen, we can do that. We could start tomorrow at scale. In this column, you have to rely on the grid. I already said when I think that'll happen. So this talks about thermodynamic efficiency. Oh, look, you know, the batteries are 73 and the hydrogen is 22. So that's thermodynamic efficiency. If we have a resource like renewables that is effectively unlimited, we don't care about thermodynamic efficiency. I mean, as an engineer, that's hard for me to say, but it's true. Because what we care about is cost. Cost environmentally and cost in terms of dollars. That's what we care about because we want to have zero CO2. The center column is zero CO2. So these things, they're not only wrong with their inputs on the top, they're wrong with their inputs on the side. Look at that, it says that transport, storage, and distribution is 5% energy losses for the direct charging. That may be the grid right now, but when we put up 6 terawatts of storage, that will not be the case anymore. And the costs aren't in here at all. The costs of this one on the left are way higher than the costs on the one in the middle. So I think this is entirely misleading, particularly because the issue is CO2. I'm going to tell you, when I was in engineering school, if my professor gave me a task and he said, here's a problem, I want you to come in with a design of a machine that'll fix it. And I come in with the machine and he says, well, will it fix the problem? And I say, no. And then he says, well, is it feasible at least to build this thing? Because it'll fix the problem a little, I'll say that. It'll fix the problem a little. Is it feasible to do it at scale? No. And before he kicks me out, I say, yeah, but it's really efficient. I mean, come on, it's missing the point. So this is a terribly misleading graph because supposedly we're going to have electric vehicles to reduce the CO2 issue. I hate this thing. So he's wrong that battery-powered vehicles can fix the CO2 problem because of the pie chart, because of the problems with the grid, because of all the things we just talked about. I don't think it will do it. It's going to be part of the solution. And I'm going to say some nice things about Mr. Musk right now. He's correct. It'll play a role. Although, look where we're going with it, too. We have Humvees now, which weigh 9,000 pounds that are battery driven. I mean, what are we doing? You know, it still weighs 9,000 pounds, and I should have said this earlier, but electric vehicles need more robust tires because generally they're heavier than all the other vehicles. So we got all the tire issue too again. He is a visionary. He's brilliant. But folks, what he is mainly, he's made a ton of money. He is a battery salesman. That's what Elon Musk is. He is a battery salesman. There were lots of really good, sophisticated automobiles before Elon Musk. He just had the bright idea to put a battery in it. And it was brilliant, and he makes a ton of money. I'm going to say I think he's genuine. I think he thinks he's on the course to correct the problem, although if he's so sure he's going to save the planet, why does he want to get to Mars so bad? Anyhow, that's that. All right. Green hydrogen at sufficient scale to substantially reduce CO2 emissions. How much might this cost, and is it feasible? I think, I'm not going to get into numbers right here, but I can tell you this. I think it would be, if we went at hydrogen at scale, instead of trying to beef up the grid and storage and all that, I think we'd be looking at very similar costs. But then we'd have a fuel that can be adapted for everything. And it would go on into the future indefinitely because it's sourced by renewables and probably some nuclear. So let's just call it parity on the grid deal, but it would fix the entire issue. Whereas the grid, even if we get really good at it, we'll fix a portion of the issue. Is it feasible? The second question my professor would ask me. Well, here's the resource, folks. I mean, the US, and I gotta back up for a second, personally haven't been experienced in wind and solar. The pushback on wind is pretty substantial onshore United States. So I think wind can't play as big a role as maybe it could from a scientific standpoint, because people tend to, there's a contingent of people that hate them, and they're very vocal. I think solar would take a bigger piece, so I've just concentrated on solar. There is plenty of the resource in the United States. It might take 1 or 2 or 3% of the land mass of the United States. Just the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, has more acreage by a factor of probably 3 than would be necessary to power the whole country with solar. It's mainly down in the southwest, but it's really not bad. Any of the yellow is feasible. I mean, the power we produce for Traverse City Light and Power is, of course, over there in that yellow, and it's not as high of a capacity factor, but it works. So basically, you've got the whole continental United States, and you need 2-3% of the land mass to do it. Still a lot. It's many, many square miles, but it certainly could be done. And if we have to decide whether it's worth it. What's even better is that the planet has plenty. And look particularly at Africa. Africa is mired in poverty. If this actually could work, that red hits right where the water hits. So you've got solar and water right across the Sahel and south of the Sahel. And the people who have monopolized Africa all these years, whatever, let's not get into that. But the people who have made, maybe kept Africa in poverty, it's a lot harder to control a diffuse resource that could be done by anybody, anywhere. If you're beholden to the grid, you can kind of force people to dance your dance. But I think Africa has an enormous potential. Africa could supply, if we could get this hydrogen thing going, all of Europe, for sure. And the money flow would go that way instead of the other way around. Saudi Arabia doesn't have a lot of water, but they certainly have a lot of sun, but they already got oil, so let's not talk about that. Australia could power the east completely. China has its own resource, plenty there. India is actually not as sunny as you would think, but it's plenty. India could power itself, South America. There's plenty. The resources are enormous. You could create enough hydrogen on that graph or this map with not a very sizable portion of it to run the whole world. And this is the thing. We're not going to force the rest of the world to do anything. We're not going to. But if we show them that it's in their best interest, we've got a chance. If they can get themselves out of poverty by putting a system in place that allows them to be the purveyors of energy, I think maybe we got a chance. And that's really what it comes down to. Because if the world doesn't adapt this, why on earth are we even bothering? It isn't going to work. The role of the oil industry, I'd like to see the oil industry come to the plate here. They know how to do this stuff. They know how to move flammable gases around. Right now we're sending LNG overseas like crazy. LNG is not much different, liquefied natural gas, than liquefied hydrogen. This could all be done, and the oil industry could do it. They have the people and the skills, and they wouldn't be being attacked anymore. They wouldn't be threatening to be put out of business. So I think that's important. Is there enough money? Well, I said it's pretty much, any of these solutions are going to be incredibly costly, trillions of dollars, any of them, at scale. But if it really is an existential threat to humanity, I like this next slide you're going to see. Has the U.S. faced anything like this before? Not quite, but kind of. I find this amazing. I'm not going to say how this happened. I did research it, but that's World War II, of course. In 1939, we were making 365 tanks a year. 4 years later, we're making 37,000. And look at aircraft, which is even more amazing. 2,000 in 1940. 4 years later, we're making almost 100,000 airplanes a year. If you scale these manufacturing items up in today's dollars, that's like $1 trillion a year that we were managing to do as a country because we were motivated to do it. So could we do it? Is there enough money? Yes. Will we? It's kind of up to us. I just have 2 recommendations, and I've written some about this that it's available too, but on the electrical generation sector, we are going at it indirectly now with this Inflation Reduction Bill. we're handing out credits, and the credits are complicated, and they have social constructs involved in them where you gotta make sure you employ this many people in this many parts, and it's really, really complicated, and it has no direct impact on CO2. There's no direct tie. There's an indirect tie. And I could talk about this for a long time, because I've used these credits that come with, and I know how it works, and they're not very efficient. Particularly at new projects, what they do is they drive the price of renewables down, but they're not good at making projects happen. I don't like mandates, but I would address it directly, and then let the market sort it out. This has been done before. There are two existing things, and I say this, I haven't told you what it is yet, but I will. Anybody ever hear of CAFE standards? Do you know what those are? Yeah. That's where the government said you gotta have so many miles per gallon. Now, ironically, we circle back to Tesla because the CAFE standards are what put Tesla in business. CAFE standards, Mr. Musk was smart enough to realize, geez, I'll make electric cars, I'll sell those credits to the other automakers, which he did, brilliant. But it worked, is my point. This is a lot like a CAFE standard. Remember I said the US grid puts out 0.85 pounds of CO2 per kilowatt hour? Just tell them, look, in 10 years it's gotta be 0.4. But here's what you can do. If that guy over there, or that woman over there can do it at 0.2, well, she can sell her bit over to you. So if you all traded out, and then the best technologies would win. Right now, we're not doing that. And so, like when I talked about carbon sequestration a little while ago, I don't think it'll work, but if somebody else, is smarter than me and makes it work, well, then they could come in under this program. And if they don't meet the standard, and I think they can, I think the utility industry, they might kick and fuss about this, but I think they prefer this to what we got. Because they already have something called capacity, which is where the government makes sure that everybody has enough spinning reserve to make the grid fail-safe. And they have capacity auctions. So this is already set in place. This would be, instead of the, whatever that bill is, 72 pages long, this would be a paragraph. It's never like that. A couple paragraphs. A couple pages. But it'd be 10 pages. It'd be simple though, and that would take, then you could forget about the electrical grid. 10 years we're gonna cut it in half, not from 2005 levels, from today levels. So that's it, that's one law. And then the second law, the US government would, instead of subsidizing charging stations and all that, they should just build out the infrastructure for hydrogen. I think everybody in here would consider buying a hydrogen car based on those parameters I put there, if you knew you could fuel it. I would. I'm not gonna buy an EV though. And then China and the rest of the world, I touched on this, you're not going to make China do anything. You're not going to force China to do anything. But China, in this, my humble opinion, has proven it's very good. I'm not going to use a bad word here. It's very good, I'm going to use the word appropriating technology and then doing it cheaper and often better. So if we took the leadership role in this, I think China would pay attention. China would probably be the financier in Africa to go in with the money to make it work. Yeah, so I think China would follow. And China is really, really important because they are the biggest CO2 emitter on the planet. And the rest of the world too. I think it would work. I don't think they're going to try and build out a grid and run around in electric cars. I don't. Overall thoughts, we know the size of the issue and what fixing it would cost, sort of. But these are the main points. To fix it, I think we need a new fuel. We use fuel for everything. Look out the window when you drive around. We use it in lawnmowers and gas grills and heating our houses and just everywhere. And we're not going to do all those things with batteries, I don't think. A lot of them we have, and things are coming along great, but it isn't going to fix the problem, not at the scale. And this is the other thing I'm sure of. Partial fixes are a gigantic, colossal, ridiculous waste. If we're going to fix this problem, we have to fix it. Why throw $500 billion at something that isn't going to fix the problem? If it costs $2 trillion, that's what you got to do, or don't do it at all. That would be how I would look at it. Thank you. That's it. That's my presentation. And I'd entertain a question or two.
Over here. Hey, very, very compelling presentation. Thank you very much. Even though you use those dirty capitalist tricks of facts and reason, you seem to have glossed over the atomic power thing. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What are the pros and cons there?
That's a really fair question, because nuclear energy is obviously CO2 free. And I'll actually tell you a story about it. I went to a screening of Al Gore's film years ago. I was sitting over there in the theater, Michael Moore's theater, and they never even mentioned, in an Inconvenient Truth, they never even mentioned nuclear power, which is exactly what you're saying. And I put my hand up and I said, hey, what about nuclear power? And I got booed. To even ask the question. Well, you were absolutely correct. I did gloss over it. If we wanted to go, nuclear power has issues that I am maybe not as familiar with. I know the one plant that's under construction right now has had considerable overruns. So I don't know from a cost standpoint where it fits, but it would be really good for producing, really good for producing green hydrogen, because you could put it where it belongs. You don't have to put it on the grid. You can put it anywhere, because you can make this stuff anywhere. So does it have a role to play? Yes, absolutely. It's 20% of the U.S. mix right now. Without that, we'd be really, much higher carbon emitter. So I don't know about costs as well as I know some of these other things, but would I put money into that? Yes, absolutely would. Research, it can clearly play a role. Its safety record is great. In fact, I would back up and say that it's really it's solar, wind, and nuclear that would have to produce all of this stuff. Not sure what nuclear costs, and the decommissioning costs have been awful. I mean, Big Rock was 67 megawatts, which is less than my wind farm down in Stony Corners, and I think it costs $300 million to decommission. That's a real small one. So I'm not as conversant. Does it have a role to play? Absolutely, and it's a really good question.
So you made a presentation about 365 tanks built in pre-World War II and some multiple 10 times that.
More than that.
More than that, sorry, 100 times that. Now,
What's the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat it.
Thank you.
so I guess, I'm sorry for,
No, I'll repeat it. Go ahead.
in that environment, was it government or was it private industry?
It was both. Okay, the question is, how the hell did the U.S. go from 300 tanks to whatever it was?
And I guess that, using that as a proxy for the future.
I tell you what they did. I said I wouldn't do it, but I appreciate the question. What Roosevelt did is he did both. What he said was he came to the people who could do this, the capitalists, the people with factories, and said, tell you what, the government will buy all the equipment for your factory. We'll buy it all. You run it. But the government owns it. We own all that stuff, but we'll put the equipment in, you run it. And then at the end of the war, and that worked brilliantly, because he was smart enough to know that the government was going to do a really bad job of running it, okay? But that was brilliant. So he went to, I forget what the program was called, but you can look it up. And that's how it was done. And at the end of the war, he auctioned it all back out. Auctioned it all back into the private industry, And they ended up being a great deal for the country. We went to a wartime footing. I think we'd have to do something like that.
But that, so using that model,
Yeah.
on a go-forward basis from an energy independence, reduced carbon perspective, you think could be, we have history there.
Yes, the question was, do we have history using that model? We do. Now, I think, I've been conservative my whole life, and I don't like government intervention generally, but that genie's out of the bottle. The government's involved in everything. And
That's how Elon Musk makes.
That's, yeah.
I mean, he just plays by the rules.
Yes,
That
right.
they set.
Yes, you're correct. I would think there might be a lot of different ways to get there to build out the infrastructure, but that certainly would be one. The government could come in and say, we'll buy the stuff, you run it. And then 5 years from now, the government could end up making money on it, because if it all works, rather than, put it this way, after 4 years, owning a tank factory was probably not a great thing to auction off, but owning a big hydrogen production facility would probably be more valuable in 5 years. So would I rather see the government do that? You damn right I would, very much so, yep. All the way back there.
So Marty, thank you for the presentation and your perspectives. Can you talk to me about birds, windmills, and former president?
Thank you. Somebody was listening back there. Look, I mean, ex-President Trump, President Trump, however you want to, he said this so many times about bird graveyards under windmills. Look, I mean, it's just not true, okay? And it's ironic because, you know, the two biggest killers of songbirds in the United States? Cats and towers, like Donald Trump put up, like Trump Tower, you know, because windows kill birds. Those, and they dwarf every other killer by, I don't know, orders of magnitude. So it's and unfortunately, here's a good number for it. Your house has windows, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You probably kill about as many birds as one windmill does. One house, one windmill. Look, I actually sort of like this, you can tell. We had to, on our windmills, we had to employ people to go out in the morning and walk around for days on end and count every bird that was found. And it was, well, wait, it gets worse. It was hideously expensive. And then, so the powers that be said, well, there's only like one bird every, 5 days. That's all they're finding. More than that. And so they said, yeah, but it's predation. During the night, predators are taking those birds. So we said, okay, what do we got to do about that? I said, you need to go out, we did, we paid for all of this, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and get mice, cut their tails off, because I guess with the tails they don't look like birds, and sprinkle them around in the night. Seriously. And then in the morning, count how many were taken by predators so that you can adjust how many birds. It turned out the adjustment was virtually nothing. Windmills are not a big killer of birds. The only issue that's real with windmills and aviation, avian life, they do have an inordinate effect on bats. So bats like them for some reason, something to do with their sonar. But even then, the numbers are so much smaller than this white nose syndrome that's killing them. But it's a little bit more real with bats, and it is a little bit more real with golden eagles, not bald eagles. Bald eagles are pretty much, they laugh at windmills. The biggest killer of bald eagles is lead poisoning, because the same people who used to come after us and want to put us in handcuffs allow lead to be used in shot still, and then the birds eat it, and they get, a bird that's just about crazy on lead might fly into a wind turbine, but because of the way bald eagles hunt, they hunt up high. Everybody knows they have keen eyesight. They come down on usually carrion, not live stuff, and so they just avoid windmills. I mean, in the UP, for instance, I'm talking too much about this, but it cost me a lot of money to learn all this. In the UP, eagles are at saturation. In other words, any young bald eagle that tries to find a nest is going to run into serious fighting because they have territories. So it's pretty much saturated, and it's getting to be that in the lower peninsula. All that had to happen with the Bald Eagle Act was to quit shooting them. And intentionally killing them. And they came back DDT. DDT was the problem. But what happened with U.S. Fish and Wildlife is they started to say, even if you do it accidentally, the law doesn't allow that. I mean, technically, those guys will look you in the face and say, if you hit one with your car accidentally, that's a felony. It's like, what, come on, really? So it's crazy stuff. But anyway, thank you for asking the question. Donald Trump is totally incorrect about that, and I don't know how he gets away with saying it, honestly. I mean, he actually says, go look, you'll see a graveyard of birds. Well, you know what, people? Please, go look. Anyway, what else? Anybody else? How about right here?
Yes, so kind of what I'm hearing proposed tonight is changing the main natural resource to generate power from coal to water.
Well, water is the raw component.
The
Yeah.
raw material,
Yeah.
same as crude oil.
Yeah,
Is the raw
yeah.
material.
I mean, you have to refine it, let's say.
So there are areas of our country and of the world right now that are struggling to get enough water.
Yes,
So where's the water come from? How much do you need?
that's a good question.
To drive a car, how much water do you need?
Very little. It takes about 3 gallons of water to make a kilogram of hydrogen. A kilogram of hydrogen will drive a car about twice as far as a gallon of gasoline. A gallon of gasoline, if you look at what the Maya industry is, it takes 2, 3, depending on the source, 400 gallons of water to make a gallon of. So it's much less. But there's an emerging technology too that, plus you do have to have pure water at some stage. You've got a hydrogen expert over there. It's a lot easier to use perfect water, but you can start with not so perfect water. Like, say out in New Mexico, they have drinking water aquifers, and they have slightly, stuff you wouldn't want to drink, you could use that. So you don't have to have really good water. And the amount you use is a lot smaller than any other energy use I know about. And then there's an emerging technology where they're actually going to, it sounds like my lobster in a pot right now to me, I haven't researched it, but supposedly they have electrolysis machines that'll take the water out of the vapor, out of the air. It's not a lot of water, much less than certainly much less than a coal plant uses for cooling or used in the life cycle of the petroleum industry. So, but it could be an issue.
Coal plant's water goes back.
So does this.
They cool and goes back.
So does
We're
this.
gonna pull hydrogen, we're gonna burn it, it's gonna go in the atmosphere.
It's gonna turn into water again. Yeah. Goes into the hydrosphere, but the problem is you may have moved it from New Mexico to New York. Yeah. It's a valid issue, and you know what the problem is? It's an emotional issue too. You know, you talk about people's water in arid regions, they're gonna get emotional. But you look at the real numbers, I don't think it's a problem.
The Palisades plant is talking, they're discussing to be open, the nuclear plant.
Yep.
Do you know where that stands now?
I looked into this myself. Palisades has been closed for quite a while, and the governor, God bless her on this one, is trying to get it back open because it doesn't make sense to take nuclear out of the picture. I think right now it's still not producing, but there are efforts underway, and I am not an insider on it, to put it back in production. I would put it back in production as long as it's safe. It's a big chunk of electricity generation in Michigan, big chunks, carbon-free.
Quickie question, has anybody ever come up with a number of what the temperature of the planet should be?
Should be is a weird, that's not a good word. According to, yeah, no, I mean.
What is the target?
I think the target is what our civilizations evolved in. Civilizations, not us as a ape, but civilization basically occurred in the last maybe 6,000 years, and I think that's the target that most people say. But it's a really good question, because take Old Mission Peninsula. Everybody wants to leave Old Mission Peninsula just like it is. Beautiful, you know, but if you ratchet it back, I don't know, 200 years, it didn't look anything like that. It would have been covered in forest. Would those people have said we need to leave it just like it is there? I mean, I think we all tend to want the world that existed when we were 10 or 12 years old. Because things were good then. But I don't have a good answer for that. The climate people say we want it like it is now. Like how civilization evolved.
Take one more question.
Okay. Right here.
Isn't most of the hydrogen right now produced from natural gas?
Yes, sir, it is.
8%.
Probably more than that. It's a minuscule amount, and that is about as
Not from water.
it's not from electrolysis. Yeah, that's as bad as burning it. It's bad, or it's the same as burning natural gas. Oh, sorry. He said the hydrogen produced right now is produced from natural gas. Yes, by steam reformation. That's why I made it. I mean, it's an excellent question. I didn't really have time to get into it, but yeah, I wouldn't use that stuff. That's the same. It's actually a little worse than burning natural gas. It puts you strip it. What it is you strip the hydrogen off the CH4 molecule, and the CO2 goes into the atmosphere. No, you can't use that stuff. That's a joke. That's the same as battery cars. That's the same as just shifting the point of pollution. So yeah, good question. You can't use that. I guess that's it.